Welcome to another Coffee with Samso. We're here at the University Club on the campus of the University of Western Australia in Crawley. I've got Mount Ridley Mines Limited here with us today. ASX code is MRD. Ever faithful Guy LePage will be here talking to us about Mount Ridley. Market cap currently about 15.5 million. The last time we spoke was February 23. It's been a while, so I think since then you've had some drilling at Mare. You got your beneficiation and your leach test. Give us an update.
Thanks for having me on the show again, Noel. First and foremost, and looking forward to my coffee at the end of it. If I
You just came for the coffee.
Make it through the end of the interview. Since February, we've been pretty active drilling. It took us a while to get on the ground because it was pretty wet. But back on the ground, did a lot of drilling around Mare predominantly, which is that high grade to north-south striking trend within the Mount Ridley project. Continue to come up with a lot of very good high grade results. You know, we had assays that we put out in the quarterly in June up to just under 5,000 ppm over some pretty big widths. So that is a consistent high grade pod within the Mount Ridley project, which we're pretty encouraged by. And we did get an assay in the hard rock up to 0.5%. So from a drilling perspective, yeah, we did quite a bit. Stopped a couple of months ago, again with the wet weather, and looking to start up sort of late September, early October.
So some of those drilling you mentioned, that they actually went up to as high as 2%.
Yeah.
Is that, do you guys see that as just part of the project, or is it?
Well, it's up to 0.5%, I think. Might have been a couple a bit high, but a bit of an unknown. I mean, basically this is a saprolite, so we're getting leaching of rare earths coming out of the hard rock. Whether we've got a carbonatite or some other intrusion that's got some hard rock potential and some high grade, we're not sure. So next phase of work, we'll do some deeper drilling to see if we can have a look at the hard rock and see if there is some sort of hard rock source. Clearly there is, you know, whether it's economic or not, or just some spot high grade values, we're not sure.
Okay. And the beneficiation results, I mean, that's crucial. The whole area of stories reaching this point now, right?
That's right. I mean, over the last 2 years, I mean, it's a young sector, which is coming from a very low knowledge base. But one thing I'm seeing is, you know, unless you can beneficiate this material, clays up to, you know, 1,500, 2,500, 3,000 ppm, I think they're really going to struggle. I'll put the ionic clays to one side because they can operate on a lower grade, but there's very few ionic deposits in Australia, or if there are, they're only a very small proportion. So I suppose meteoric's the good example of one that's about 40% ionic in Brazil. So that's so far got the best, you know, leach characteristics of anything I've seen in the clay space. But fortunately, you know, Mount Ridley does have a lot of that felsic rich material which does beneficiate. So that's been a huge bonus, and obviously the results we put out recently, you know, showing 150, 160% upgrade were pretty encouraging, I thought.
And your leach testing is kind of consistent with that upgrading story as well, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of parts to it. We sort of, because we're in a saline environment, we decided that sulfuric acid, which was the lixivant that most people were looking to use, was not going to work because we're in a saline environment. So we figured hydrochloric's a better reagent, and we're getting much higher recoveries, up to sort of 70-80%. The downside of that is it pulls out a lot of the aluminium and iron and other impurities. So the leach tests have been good. The next part of the puzzle we need to solve is, you know, how are we going to pull out all these impurities at the back end? And if we are using hydrochloric, which is pretty aggressive acid, you know, down to a pH of below 1, you know, what implications is that going to have for capital costs? So we're going to need to use a lot of stainless steel, and you know, what are the implications for that?
Your project's big, right? Almost 3,500 square kilometres.
Yeah.
Is Mare just a portion of that? Do you expect yourself going out and looking at the other parts?
Well, we could. I think it's a case of the metallurgy drive and the exploration. What we need to find is areas that can beneficiate. So Jody's, Winston's, Mia, some of these prospects have quite high proportions of felsic material that we can beneficiate. There are Butch and some other areas that are more mafic derived, so which don't beneficiate. So while there's significant potential, we've never put out an exploration target or a resource target. I mean, we could do that, but I don't think that's really relevant. I think it's more about focusing in on trying to find 100 to 1 billion tonnes of the really high grade material.
Just looking at one of your diagrams in the announcement where you're talking about the corridor, I can see the drill lines about 2+ kilometres apart, but it looks that it seems to be consistent. Is that correct?
It's laterally it's consistent. There's a lot of variability in the profile, so the depth and the thicknesses can vary quite significantly. So, that's the objective of the next 6 months, leading into a resource, to try and tighten that spacing up. But the good thing is we are seeing some pretty big widths.
Everyone knows the clear rare earth, or the market, commodity market's soft. The clear rare earth market's is soft. How do you see this going to play out for Mount Ridley and the likes of Mount Ridley's?
Well, it's a good question. I think the market's generally sold down anyone in rare earth, because obviously basket price of rare earths, in particular neodymium and praseodymium, is off 60%. So, Hastings, Arafura, all did their studies at much higher prices. So, I think the demand will recover. It's just a very opaque market, so it's a bit hard to understand where the rare earths market's going. We know the Western world is desperate to get a alternative source of supply other than China. So it is facing some headwinds. It's been a pretty savage sell down. I don't think many projects work at current prices. So, I think we might be near the bottom of that rare earth cycle. So hopefully, we're getting a bit of a lift next year. And I suppose moving on to the two camps, you've got the hard rock and the clay. The market's really looking for a flow sheet that makes sense. The flow sheets I've seen in the marketplace that have been published, there's only a couple of them, don't make sense to me, because the recoveries, don't justify the amount of capital they're spending. So you're going to need to get these recoveries up over 50%, I think. So, I think that's what the market's waiting for, is a flow sheet that, that can hang together.
How much of this sell down in pricing is artificial in a sense? There's talk, you read articles how, the Chinese are manipulating the market. Is that valid, do you think?
Well, it's certainly possible. It is an opaque market. You're looking to get offtake agreements, and whether the Western world's going to develop its own exchanges, and you're looking at obviously lithium moving on to the LME and those sort of things. That's probably what's needed, is some sort of exchange to get some certainty into pricing, because right now it's a lot of assumptions, but whether those assumptions are going to be correct is hard to know.
I've created an addition to the Coffee or Samso conversation. I reached out to the public to ask you some questions.
Yeah.
I got one from Steve O from Twitter. Is the company still going to list on the Frankfurt exchange?
Possibly. I think when we've got a bit more demand generally in the rare earth space, we'll probably push ahead with that. We're looking at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
But we're seeing good volume coming out of Frankfurt in lithium and copper starting to come back. So when we see that market turn around, we'll certainly look at it.
Okay. Keith Nelson, again from Twitter. What is MRD's strategic roadmap beyond 2023?
Good question. I think the primary goal for me is to really publish a JORC resource, of reasonable size and grade. That's absolutely critical, and we've got to have resources we can beneficiate to 2,000-3,000 ppm. Otherwise, I just don't think we're in the game. The second thing is to whether we publish a scoping study or pre-feasibility at some point, but really it's a matter of developing a flow sheet. In particular, you know, trying to get the recoveries up and then trying to quantify um, not only the method of extracting impurities out of solution, but also the costs. So there are a couple of key steps that will determine, if we have a project or not. And I think that's something that the whole clay rare earth space has got to deal with in some form or another.
Okay. Again from Keith Nelson, what actions are MRD taking now to position themselves for success amongst Esperance peers?
Well, I don't think we've got a pretty big ground position. There might be some consolidation in the area. I think there's obviously steps, if we're going to proceed to build a project there, which is a way off, what about the power sources, the renewable energy, port capacities, all these sort of things. But I think before we get to the downstream end, it's really a matter of putting that flow sheet out and putting some economics around a flow sheet because without that, nothing's going to happen. And without that, there's not going to be any sort of industry push to move this project ahead, or any of them for that matter. And I think the government support will be there, but I think the government wants to see if there's a real project there.
Richard Mon, I guess some of these you've kind of answered.
Yeah.
What recovery rates do MRD need to be economical? Is using HCl going to be too costly? And have MRD applied for any government grants?
HCl I don't think is going to be too costly as a reagent. What might be costly is the extracting the impurities. So it's not just the HCl. The other cost of using HCl is the increase in capital costs. So there are a few questions there we've got to answer. At 25 grams per litre, I think it is economic to use HCl. But as we've seen with some flow sheets, the real cost is in the neutralisation or the extracting the impurities. So in terms of government grants, we've been applying and getting R&D rebates because a lot of our stuff is sort of in that research category. So we'll continue to do that, and we've got some pretty substantial refunds so far.
One question from Dr. Diana Zivak, who is from the Geological Survey of South Australia. I had a Samso insight with her. Her question was, and I think you may have touched on some of this, is has Mount Ridley progressed in determining the mineralogy and basement control on your clay-hosted projects?
Well, that's work in progress. We've got some preliminary data looking at halloysites and clay mineralogies and looking at concentrations of rare earths and then extractabilities and then the ability to beneficiate. One of the things about rare earths is the rare earths themselves are very fine grained. So we've tried to do some microscopic work on some of the stuff and not actually been able to see the rare earths. So it's on a sort of broad scale, we're getting a better handle on it, but working out the mineralogy, how the rare earths behave in the profile, how weathering affects it, that's a very much a long-term project.
Yeah. Well, I know how you're feeling, where you're not sure what you've
Well,
got.
when you can't see it, you think, well, actually, it is challenging. There is nothing about rare earths that is simple. It is a very complicated business from the conceptual ideas, looking at the geology, and then looking at the end users and selling this and actually separating concentrates, which the Chinese have all the expertise in. So, there's nothing about it that's simple. The prize is there, but it's a long journey.
Then you could say that for most commodities, I
Well,
guess.
in the case of gold, oxide gold deposits, we can sell it to the Perth Mint. We don't need to think about who or what we're going to sell or how to separate a concentrate. Polymetallic deposits, lithium, we've gone a long way down the track. We're producing it, but aside from Lynas, there's no real rare earth production out of Australia. So, and that's a super high grade hard rock. So we're right out there at the start of the learning curve on this one.
So, I mean, we know the market's soft and everything else. What do you think the path forward is for the rare earth market? Do you think a softening of monetary policy could help in
I
future?
can't see a recovery in rare earth prices until you see significant turnaround in the economy in China. Recently Tesla's been discounting EVs quite heavily. The subsidies in China and the US are coming off, so we're seeing a softening in EV sales. I think we're sort of near the peak of the lithium market. I mean, just look at the Albemarle bid for Liontown, $6.6 billion bid. Reminds me a lot of when Glencore bid for Jubilee back in 2008. Top of the nickel market, 50,000 a tonne. So I feel we're at another transition point. So it's a very hard question to answer, but I think you'll see a recovery in rare earth because I can't see a lot of production coming out at the Western world with NdPr prices where they are.
I guess it's always been, from the beginning, it was a political market, I guess, in some ways, right? Without the politics, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, the irony is every conversation involves China because China's buying our iron ore and they're processing rare earths. So I think we've got to get on board and work with China on rare earths, not necessarily trying to compete with them.
So how do you make Mount Ridley stand out? Everyone's, as you say, it's a very crowded space now. We've had many conversations on rare earths. How do you make Mount Ridley stand out?
Well, I think it has a couple of things going for it. I mean, a big part of any mineral deposit is where it's located. So from a location infrastructure point of view, it's a cracking project. A lot of it's on Crown land. You've got water, gas, pipeline, power, rail, everything's there. It's a big project, so we've got size. It's got high grade, and then it's got the ability to beneficiate. So there are a couple of the sort of things that set it apart, I think, from probably almost all the other rare earth projects in Australia that I've seen. It really is in a great position from that point of view. That's all fine, but we still need to go that next step. So the market's, quite rightly marked everything down until someone can prove otherwise. And I think to really get the value, we're going to need to deliver a flow sheet and a study at some point and get a lift in rare earth prices before we see a significant uplift in the share price.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, it's a good lesson on rare earths, I guess, in some ways. I mean, the market's sort of going to, I call it a mature, stagnant point now where everyone's waiting for the same thing, right?
Yeah,
the flow
that's
sheet.
right.
And there's, you've shown that you've got a lot of resource. You've shown your grades are there up in the, but it's that magical flow sheet, right?
Yeah, that's right. People keep reminding you that the market's never wrong, and I don't think it is. I think the market sold everything down because right now a lot of it's worth nothing, or it's struggling, or the pre-production production is challenging for some of the hard rock players. So I think the market's, with the money flowing out of risk assets in the last 18 months, it's flowing out of high risk, volatile sectors like rare earths, and I think that's probably, telling you something.
I guess the good news is the world keeps going, right? We still need
That's right.
all the commodities we've been talking
and
about.
And look, all the commodities go up over time. It's a matter of when, and you really need to be in the right end of that grade tonnage curve, being the lowest cost quartile to make these things work, and that's where we're trying to position Esperance at the moment.
I guess when people like us who've been in this industry for long enough, we've seen this up and down. It's like a day going to work, I guess.
That's right. Yeah.
There's nothing extraordinary about it, right?
No, it's just another cycle, and I think we're probably at the bottom of this rare earth cycle. So it's not a lot of fun. It's a lot of hard work and not a lot of reward. But we've got to resolve Esperance and either make it work. If it isn't going to work, and if it's going to be in the bottom of the pile in terms of quality of projects, move on to something else.
Okay, great. Guy, thank you for everything.
All right, thanks,
And
Noel.
again, we'll thank Florence for supplying the coffee. And thank you very much.
Thank you.